I want to dive deeper into the roots of the issues that we're talking about today. You know, when we look at events that like what took place yesterday, when we look at events like that superficially, we come up with superficial solutions. And we've got to have more than that. We need to look at these issues more deeply. So joining me now to kind of look at all of this under a microscope, so to speak, is Dr. Ben Carson. He's the founder and chairman of the American Cornerstone Institute, a name that's familiar and loved to all of us. Dr. Carson, welcome back to Washington Watch. Great to have you.
Thank you, Jody. It's very nice to be with you.
Okay, let's. I want to bring this issue up first because this was offensive and yet it is very enlightening. When you have, say, former Biden White House press secretary Jen Psaki yesterday, she drew attention negatively for the most part, but she put out a tweet saying that people need to stop it with all the thoughts and prayers. And then Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey made a similar remark. Let's start with this. What's your response to the belief out there that we don't need to be praying and we don't need to be calling on people to pray?
Well, if you were Satan, isn't that what you would say? I think the lack of decency and faith is manifesting itself very strongly now. But, when we look at what's going on in our cities, it's not hard to understand why we have so much violence going on. Obviously, the key to all of it is faith in God and a relationship with Him. But let's put that aside for a moment and just talk about human nature. Little children, when they aren't disciplined, they become monsters. And basically, that's what they're doing with the things like cashless bail. People are doing horrendous things, and they're back out on the street before you can get the paperwork done. Well, needless to say, it's encouraging people to act in a way that is creating a great deal of havoc in our cities. And it doesn't need to be that way. If it were run well, if the city were run well, though, guess what? There wouldn't be a reason to try to fundamentally change it. And there are those who want to fundamentally change who we are. They don't like the system that we have. They don't like our Constitution. They don't like our Bill of Rights, our Declaration of Independence, our faith, our sense of community, our sense of liberty. They want to control everything. That can't happen if things are running smoothly. So stir the pot. Give people license to go out and do all manner of things. I've got a list here of ridiculous things that people have done and been right back out on the street the same day. And that frightens everybody.
It certainly does.
But the other thing is, why are these young men so easily manipulated into doing bad things? Well, God created us. He gave us the plan for families, a mother, a father, and children. A large number of people, particularly in inner cities, do not have a father. They do not have an authority figure. The first authority figure they run into is somebody who's badder than they are, or the police. In many cases, it doesn't turn out well for them, and they become hardened. And you're not going to solve this problem with any kind of Band-Aid. We really need, as a society, start thinking about how do we substitute or encourage the development of complete families, with fathers included. That means that some people might want to become foster fathers and become role models and figures for some of those children. I was talking to a police officer in Baltimore, which has a severe crime problem, and he said he walks the same beat every day, knows everybody. They all know him by first name. He says he never has to buy lunch. People are always inviting him in for lunch. But they tell him when things are going on. He knows when there's something that's amiss and can take care of it. And that neighborhood has a much lower crime rate than any of the others. That's something that we can learn, relationships, developing those relationships and particularly for those families who have an absent father.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because going back and looking into the research here, it appears that this shooter's parents actually got a divorce back in 2012, 2013, some of that time frame, and that had a pretty significant impact on his life. There is no doubt, aren't I correct, that there is a correlation between fatherless homes and children who get involved in criminal behavior and all sorts of mischief, if we'll just put it that way. There is a relationship there, isn't there?
There is definitely a relationship there. And I don't want people to get discouraged and say, well, 70, 80% of the homes are broken now. There's no hope for us because there's a new movie that was just released about the children in the college campuses, Revival Generation, and how they are flocking in droves to Christ. And no matter how tormented a childhood one has, accepting Christ and allowing him to become the center of your life will solve the problem. So there are two things we need to be concerning ourselves about. How do we create an environment that helps to foster the development of families again? And how do we stand up for our Christian beliefs? For too long a period of time, people have stood in the corner and let the left dictate everything and just sort of kept their mouths shut. It's time to open your mouth. And, that will encourage other people to get involved too.
Amen and amen. Extremely well said, Dr. Carson. We hear a lot, and I kind of introed this time with you, we hear a lot about superficial solutions to many of the issues that are facing our country. But in this particular topic, the superficial solutions of medication, actually mutilating children who are suffering from gender dysphoria. We talk about on a broader scale gun control to stop shootings, but there's not enough attention to what you're talking about right now, which is the root of the problem. That which is driving violence around the country, and at the heart of it, it's a spiritual problem, and it must be dealt with spiritually. Your thoughts?
Well, unless that happens, we're dead in the water. Our country is much too strong to be overcome militarily, but the Marxists and those who want to fundamentally change us have a secret weapon, and that is division, divide and conquer, on the basis of race, age, income, gender, political affiliation, religious affiliation, have at each other's throat, canceling each other. And when we do that, obviously we make ourselves very vulnerable. That's why Jesus said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. So we have to realize that we're being manipulated. And all you have to do is go back and look at things like the congressional record, January 10th, 1963, where Congressman Herlong of Florida read in the 45 Goals of Communism in America. You'll see all the things that are happening now. Gaining control of the school system so you can indoctrinate the kids, gaining control of the news media in Hollywood so you can change the culture, destroying the family, particularly the role of fathers in families, taking God out of everything, changing the real gospel to the social gospel, and making sexual perversion normal, natural, and healthy. The list goes on and on. This is the way that they're trying to conquer us. And unless we wake up, which I am encouraged, particularly what I'm seeing on some of the college campuses, I think we have a fighting chance.
Wow. Great news. Let me throw this out to you. I wanted to give this question to you just because of your background as director of all your medical background and your expertise in so many areas and your service at Johns Hopkins. But you know a lot about medication. Is there a possibility, or could the drugs, the hormone treatments that are being prescribed to these gender-confused patients, could all of that in and of itself be further complicating the mental instability of people like the shooter that carried out the acts of violence yesterday?
Well, we certainly have not done any controlled studies on that, but one would have to be thinking about that, particularly since there's been two mass shootings of this nature that have been carried out by transgender people. You know, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? But it is definitely something to look at, the way these people are being manipulated. And I'm not sure that the majority of people who think that they're transgender are actually transgender. But if you start taking someone who is very suggestible, like a child, and very vulnerable, and tell them, you might not be a girl, you might not be a boy, and not having their parents' input, it's not going to be long before they start thinking, you know, now that you think about it, I think I am a girl, that's the boy saying, or vice versa. That's really nothing short of child abuse that's going on in our society. And we have a responsibility to do everything we can to stop it, and not being afraid, not being intimidated, because that's one very successful tactic of Marxists: intimidate the opposition into silence while you carry on your nefarious purposes. That's what's going on in our society.
Yeah, and what you just described, I think we see a lot of that. The shooter yesterday was obviously depressed, has been for years, and had some exceedingly disturbing thoughts that have been taking place for years. And clearly, transitioning was not the solution, as many at least on the left have been claiming. And so the left comes in a situation like this to the parents many times. We've heard this over and over. And they will say that the choice is between having a dead son or a living daughter or something along those lines. What about having a living son? What about really helping these children rather than transgendering them? Your thoughts on that?
And it's not necessarily the parents' fault. I know a lot of people say, well, if you had the right kind of environment for them, they were growing up properly, and you were praying with them and reading the Bible, that wouldn't happen. That's not necessarily true. Teachers, educators have an enormous influence upon a child. And, you know, they can very easily plant those seeds. You know, it was Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, who said, give me your children to teach for 4 years, and the seed that I sow will never be uprooted. They realized that if they can get in there early while the ground is fertile, they can sow all kinds of seeds in there, and you can have the most beautiful home environment, but it's going to grow like a weed. And that's why it's so important. Parents and guardians know what's being taught in those schools. Go to the meetings, talk to the teacher, get elected to the school board, take responsibility. Don't just complain and hope that somebody else will take care of the problem for you.
Well, you know, it looks to me, I mean, you say the parents, you don't blame the parents. I don't either. I mean, they're in many instances just taking the information that they are being given. But even the shooters, like in the case yesterday, and others like them, in some regards are also victims themselves, and perhaps victims of medical malpractice. I mean, we've got to look at this whole scenario of what's taking place, and the doctors who have vowed
Absolutely.
to do no harm, are they in fact doing harm by pushing transgender surgeries? We've got about a minute left.
They're doing a great deal of harm. And I'm not exactly sure how they can do it, having taken the Hippocratic Oath. But by the same token, you know, how can they kill little babies and do all manner of horrible things? It's because they have a heart problem. They need to let love into their hearts so that they care about their fellow human beings. Because many of the doctors, they totally know that shooting up these children with all kind of hormones and changing their natural growth patterns is not a good thing. And yet, they make a lot of money. If you took the money out of it, guess what? It would stop. They wouldn't be. Nobody would be taking that risk if they weren't making a ton of money. And I hope that that's going to change in the near future, because there's been enough light shined upon it. And there's been some professional shaming of people who actually do that. And I think that's helpful for us as a nation.
Wow. Dr. Ben Carson, always an honor to speak with you, sir, and thank you so much for joining us today on Washington Watch. That's a powerful point right there that also is not being brought up very much. You follow the money trail, and a lot of times you'll get to the bottom of a lot of things.
The love of money is the root of all evil.
Yes, sir. Dr. Ben Carson, founder and chairman of the American Cornerstone Institute. Thank you.